final episode of the Book of Boba Fett has dropped on Disney+, so today we're going to stop and rank all 7 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the 7 Book of Boba Fett episodes. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One more thing before we get started. I do have a companion video to this over on my Patreon page where I review the entire season, kind of say what I would change up, how would I improve things, dive into all the details. It's about 20 minutes long. If you're interested in that, the link is down below in the description. Join at any level and you can unlock that video and over 100 other exclusive videos, and let's get started. In last place, Chapter 3, The Streets of Mos Espa. Now for me, unfortunately, this is the episode where I started getting very worried about this season, and honestly, the show never fully won me back. And what I mean by that is in the flashbacks, in the first 2 episodes, I started getting really invested into Boba Fett joining this Tusken Raider clan. And then in this episode, they just kind of get killed off very early on, and it tries to pause to make it emotional, but it just happens so suddenly and in such an odd matter-of-fact fashion that I didn't feel anything, though I really felt like I should. And it just felt like it set up these characters I was getting invested in just to wipe them out, and I'm like, wait, where is this season going if that wasn't where things were headed? And then in the present timeline in the story, it kicks off with Boba Fett trying to appease this person frustrated by this local biker gang. He goes to talk to them and ends up recruiting them to be part of his army. And the characters just feel so goofy and cartoonish and out of place in Star Wars. Like, legitimately, they feel like leftover characters from Alita Battle Angel, which was directed by Robert Rodriguez, and a movie that I thoroughly enjoy and do recommend you check out. But like these cybernetically upgraded bikers, that's Alita. And when you're especially on Tatooine, which is such a drab earth tone planet, and then you have these bright colored characters, they just stand out, they don't fit, and they weren't really all that interesting. In which case, this is where it just made me nervous about the show, because the stuff I was interested in from the first 2 episodes, they just cut it off at the knees. Then in the present timeline, they're introducing these bikers and they're playing this goofy back and forth of like, is it the mayor? Is it the Pikes? Is it the Hutts? Nope, it's not the Hutts. Never mind. They're giving gifts. They're leaving the planet. And I think that was a gigantic mistake to do that game of who's the bad guy instead of just making it very clear very early on that it's the Pikes. And so much of that comes down to this episode that was awkwardly directed, introduced weird characters, and hurt the plot lines for the season that were actually working. Or killed the plot lines for the season that were actually working. In 6th place, Chapter 1, Stranger in a Strange Land. Now, right before this episode debuted, all of the Star Wars accounts tweeted out, talk about it, but don't spoil it. They had all these messages making sure don't spoil what happens in the episode. And also, they didn't send out any of the episodes to the press for early review the way that, like, Marvel normally sends you 2 or 3 episodes. They didn't send out anything for review. Critics watched it as it debuted, and some speculation was that there was going to be a bunch of big twist, turn reveals. No. The kickoff to this show is kind of a slow, clunky, awkward start to a show where you have Boba Fett picking up where the post-credit scene for Mandalorian Season 2 left off, and from what happens at the beginning to what happens at the end of the episode, it's just him being like, I want people to respect me, but I'm not going to be a tyrant. And then the episode ends, and that's, I want people to respect me, but I'm not going to be a tyrant. Like, it doesn't really develop it much at all, except to say there's some people that don't respect him and want to take him out. But it just felt very underdeveloped. And then they did these flashbacks of him picking up with how did he escape the Sarlacc pit. And it gets very literal. It's like showing him in the belly, fighting his way out. And this felt like an example of sometimes it's better to not explain everything. Like, you don't need to over-explain how someone in armor was able to survive. And sometimes when you show that, it makes it seem a little bit too ridiculous. And then it kind of awkwardly shows him punch his way to the sand, Jawas grab him, and then these Tuskens end up taking him in and as kind of a slave, and he earns their respect, but it's very clunky the way it plays out. And because it's trying to do these flashbacks as well as the present day timeline, both of them felt underdeveloped in the way they were done. And while the one with the flashbacks felt rushed because it was rushing through things, and then the other one felt like it just didn't have time to go anywhere with it. So an episode that kicked off that underwhelmed me from the beginning. Next up, Chapter 4, The Gathering Storm. Now, this is the episode that basically gives the backstory on Boba Fett and Fennec, and I thought this was a decent episode that it's mostly about giving backstory. It progresses the main storyline. Establishes that we're going to war, the Pikes are the villain, we're going to need to recruit more people. But for the most part, it's a backstory episode and does a good enough job at that of showing Boba Fett, finding Fennec, filling in the gaps of the things that we'd kind of seen in Mandalorian and what exactly happened, kind of following through how did he get his ship back, when did they learn to like work together and decide that they're going to continue on this mission together. There's a few odd things in here. Like they have this whole section where Boba Fett tries to get his armor out of the Sarlacc pit, which only kind of makes sense in light of the show because they show him punch his way out of the pit in his armor. And then you can understand like maybe why he forgot that because he passed out. But it just plays very weird because the audience already has this information. And so it just feels like a very weird scene to put in there. And then they have him mow down the bikers that killed the Tuskens, but they didn't actually kill the Tuskens. He just slaughtered them and they were innocent. Sort of innocent. It has that play out, but because it's essentially just montaging through here's everything you need to know but didn't see before with Fennec and Boba Fett, it doesn't like set up the bikers as this story of like he needs to track them down and pay revenge and like he gets revenge on the people that took away his new family. No, it's just like it's showing he did this, then he did this, then he did this, and then he mowed those people down. And it doesn't even pause to have a moment of you're like, yeah, we got him or anything like that. And it can't really do that because he killed the wrong people. So it just plays and it just lands flat. So I liked elements of this. I liked seeing the friendship and the work relationship formed there. But it was nice that it felt like the episode ended and finally things were kicking into high gear because it was like, as soon as the Mandalorian music played, you're like, oh, I know who's showing up next week. But at the same time, an episode that did some awkward things and directed some sequences pretty poorly. In fourth place, Chapter 7, In the Name of Honor. And to me, this was probably the most frustrating episode of the show because I enjoyed a lot of the action sequences. It's fun to be in Star Wars world and have a bunch of pew 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 laser gun battles and monsters showing up battling robots. But because the first 6 episodes didn't do their job, it just shackled this episode. There was no possible way that this episode could pay off as well as it should because I didn't care enough about the story or the villains, and that's what ended up happening here. So when Boba Fett and Mando are back-to-back and they're shooting armies of dudes, it's cool. When Boba Fett shows up on the back of a Rancor and starts beating up big gigantic robots, that's awesome. Give me more of that. I'm all on board for ridiculous things like that. That worked for me. Totally dug that. And then once the Rancor goes full King Kong mode and is climbing up buildings and tearing things up, cool. Grogu, Mando giving each other a hug, I'm eating it up. The problem is that the whole thing felt hollow. Like these moments are cool because it's cool to see those shots, but the season absolutely did not set up its villains properly. Like the Pikes are not interesting. They're not compelling. They're not threatening. There's no urgency. There's no real stakes. in which case you do not care when they're defeated. They don't even give you the person that's like the face of the Pikes. Like, it's kind of Cad Bane, but not really. He's the hired gun that shows up at the end. So you get to the end of it, and because all those other episodes had been playing around, being like, is it the Hutts or is it the mayor? Oh, it's the Pikes, because they waste all of their time on that. There's no one that you want to see defeated. There's no, like, even that they did like this final twist reveal, like, surprise, the Pikes are the ones that killed the Tuskens. Well, that made, like, it's just like a twist reveal too late, so you just don't care about it by the time they say that. In which case, they could have spent 5 episodes where you're like, oh, I want to see the Pikes destroyed for what they did to the Tuskens. No, because you didn't care enough about the Tuskens. They played it like he already defeated these people. So it's just, the whole thing lands flat on an emotional level, and it shouldn't. So it's just frustrating, because there's all these cool things that do happen, cool reunions that do happen, but because finales are all about payoff, and payoff doesn't work if you don't set it up properly. And they did not set up a compelling plot line, and they certainly did not set up the Pikes as good villains. And everything that made Cad Bane interesting was borrowed knowledge from a different show. So unfortunately, a superficially entertaining episode that was totally hollow when it came to any substance. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the 7 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett. Also, remember, there is a companion video to this over on my Patreon page where I kind of dive into a lot of these issues that I've mentioned about the episodes up to this point in time. Kind of give my thoughts on maybe some of the things they could have done to fix some of this, to make the season more cohesive, work better on the whole. Link is down below in the description for that if you want to check it out. In third place, Chapter 2, The Tribes of Tatooine, of the Boba Fett focused episodes of the Book of Boba Fett. This was my favorite of the bunch, in particular the flashbacks. And this episode made it clear that they were essentially following the same story template, the Go primitive story template, the Go native story template of A Man Called Horse, Dances with Wolves, Ferngully, Pocahontas, Last Samurai, Avatar. It's a tried and true formula of this aging soldier that's become cynical, frequently involved in a civil war, who ends up going into a more primitive people and learns to respect their customs, earns their respect, and joins their tribe. It's a tried and true story template, and it makes sense in light of what they did with Mandalorian as kind of these westerns in the Star Wars realm, where they took a bunch of Western story templates for each individual episode. It makes sense that over here, let's tell a story that uses that Go primitive, Go native type storyline for Boba Fett, and it's why his character changed so much. And I was, by the end of it, I was like, all right, I see what you're doing here. I see where the show is going. All right, I'm getting on board with this. Unfortunately, they didn't continue down that path, which I think was a gigantic mistake. There was so much more that you could have done in light of what they set up in this episode that would have been more compelling than what they did do. In particular, the whole show, back half of the show, is about Boba Fett needing allies, needing an army. And the first 2 episodes in particular, this one, establish him as having an army, having a tribe of people that have his back and he has their back. And instead of tying them back in and paying this off really nicely, I think they wasted the potential of all of this, and I just don't understand why they did that. But this episode, I thought, told a solid story about Boba Fett, and I almost think maybe that's what the Book of Boba Fett should have been. Boba Fett with the Tusken Raiders for 7 episodes, showing him change, transform, and decide that Tatooine is his planet that he wants to rule. But, oh well, they didn't do that. But the episode's still good. Our runner-up, Chapter 6, Star Wars the Episode. It's called From the Desert Comes a Stranger, which really only ties into one scene in the entire episode. Anyway, this is an episode that is not a great episode of the Book of Boba Fett, but delivers a bunch of amazing Star Wars moments. And when it comes to this season, which episodes got me really excited about Star Wars, delivered moments I was like, I love that I'm getting that. This was the one that did that the second most, while at the same time being a very odd episode of this particular show. So what's the episode about? Mando goes to visit Grogu to deliver his present, and in the process of that, we get to see Grogu being trained by Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker in his prime, training a young Force-sensitive character. And by young, I mean a young character that is older than Luke Skywalker in reality. And there's just something about that that's special. That I understand there's a big debate about the technology. Should they use it? And they did like robot voice form rather than having Mark Hamill do the lines. There's a lot of questions about it. But it is also really cool that we're able to see Mark Hamill in his 30s in this show at a point in time where Mark Hamill is about to turn 70 years old. Likewise, we get to see Luke Skywalker with Ahsoka Tano, which it's just cool to get to see that. We dive more into the Mando character and how much he really is drawn to Grogu. And then actually tying into the plot line of the season, we have Mando being sent by Boba Fett to try and recruit Cobb Vanth. And I love this Cobb Vanth character. I sure hope we get more of the character with Timothy Olyphant. And you get a moment where he gets to be awesome at the beginning of it. And then at the end of it, the fact that they set him up as being awesome. And then Cad Bane shows up, who's even awesomer. Just really nicely done. And with that final moment, it's the first time in the season where I really went like, oh, the Pikes are dangerous because they have him. It's the first time I felt tension was at the end of the next to last episode of the season, but it worked really nicely for me. Totally dug it. So while it's weird that so much of the Book of Boba Fett was focused in on Luke Skywalker and Grogu, doesn't change the fact that it was thoroughly enjoyable. But coming in first place, Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 1. Excuse me, Chapter 5, The Return of the Mandalorian. And right out of the gate, it gives us this amazing cold open of Mando doing a job, and it turns violent, and he pulls out the Darksaber, and just immediately, it was a reminder of what I loved about The Mandalorian in just what felt like was missing or what has been missing from the Book of Boba Fett. But just like a compelling character with a clear code that he lives by and seeing that character doing awesome things. And for whatever reason, that's just not what they delivered with Boba Fett during the Book of Boba Fett. So as soon as it puts the focus on Mando, the show got better. And then from there, we kind of play catch up with where he's at with his Mandalorian cult people and learn about the mythology of the Darksaber. It just felt like the kickoff to Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 1. Just felt like that's what we were watching because it was continuing all these plot threads from that season. And then it leads to him getting a new ship back on Tatooine and getting recruited to go on this mission. It felt more cohesive. It had a character I was more invested in. So each thing that happened mattered because I cared about Mando. And watching the episode just seemed to highlight everything that wasn't working about the Book of Boba Fett. They didn't find a way to make Boba Fett a character that I connected with, that I was engaged with, where I cared about what was going to happen next. In which case, suddenly, as soon as it started being Mandalorian and stopped being Book of Boba Fett, I was all in and fell in love with Star Wars all over again. And so for me, this is the one that told the most focused, compelling story. Weird that it's in the Book of Boba Fett. Weird that this isn't Episode 1 of Mandalorian Season 3. But for me, easily the best episode of the Book of Boba Fett. So it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, I've done reviews of each of the episodes of the Book of Boba Fett. You can check those out right over there. You can check out my other Star Wars content right down there. And if you want to see that companion video where I talk about all of my thoughts about Book of Boba Fett Season 1, how I would have fixed some things, would have changed some things, link is down below in the description to check out my Patreon page. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.